Hi guys, so I'm Tim, CEO and co-founder at Kokoon, and today we're here to talk about sleep myths, debunking a few of them, diving into a bit of sleep science. We're lucky enough to have one of our sleep experts, Nick, here with us. So Nick's been working with us for over 5 years, a researcher at the University of Oxford. Sleep and behavioural research has been his focus in and around circadian rhythms, the impact of daylight and what role that plays on our sleep. And really interestingly, he's also been consulting with athletes, C-suite executives who are really looking to be at the peak of their game. So, working out what role sleep can take in their stressful, busy, often high pressure roles and jobs. So seeing lots of exotic conditions and challenges that you've helped people address. So thank you for joining us. And I'm sure this will be a very interesting dive into sleep.
Yes, so thanks very much for having me today, Tim. So yes, I'm a sleep researcher and a consultant. I've been working with a number of elite athletes for a number of years, from ATP tennis players to Olympic skiers to Olympic athletes, elite footballers, trying to improve their performance on the court or the pitch or during the time when they're competing. And so what I've been looking at really is using circadian rhythms to improve their sleep, but also improve their performance as well throughout the daytime. I also work with a number of major businesses and major corporations looking to train a better sleep culture within their business to try and peak performances as a unit, but also working with CEOs predominantly trying to improve their performance throughout the day. This has shown really interesting results in improvements in focus, in concentration, in performance, but also at the end of the day, we've seen a huge impact on productivity as well, and out the back of that, financial impacts.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you with us. So we've got various true or false things that we're going to run through and see if we can debunk, get into. So some of these are a bit wild, so you have to, bear with us a little bit. But some of these are kind of real questions that, we had a lot of people asking us. So we just wanted to get a bit of an expert insight. So first of these, we call them sleep myths, is teenagers, they're just lazy. They're sleeping in and, devils to get out of the bed in the morning.
Well, that's interesting. That's the common misconception. We have an understanding that teenagers are inherently lazy. But the thing that's interesting about teenagers is that apart from when they're babies, the brain is undergoing the greatest change when you're a teenager. So therefore, it requires probably a larger amounts of sleep to then process all the changes and all the information that's happening within the brain and within the body as well. There are lots of hormonal changes, and therefore a rest and recovery is vital. But what's really interesting with teenagers is that when they reach the teenage years, their body clock shifts forwards. So they go about 2 hours ahead of the rest of society, or the rest of the time that they would be asleep. And so therefore they will then naturally stay up later. They will then naturally sleep for the same period of time, but then wake up naturally later. But as a society, we don't change our behaviours around their behaviours. So we still set school times early in the morning. Teenagers probably still have to get up 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you asked an adult to get up at that same time, it would be the same as asking them to get up at around 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then asking them to perform in the same way we ask teenagers to perform at school. So it was really unfair. So not only have they got the stigma of being lazy, but they also have a genetic disposition to be waking up a lot later. And then society is asking them to perform even earlier. And so we end up with a scenario where teenagers are constantly sleep deprived, and therefore that exacerbates the whole situation as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends is a teacher in a kind of secondary school, and he's always talking about how energy drinks are all they're drinking, and they're drinking them in vast quantities, and sometimes falling asleep in lessons. And what are the kind of impacts, kind of long term, of the kind of sleep deprivation crisis that we're seeing in the schools?
Well, we're seeing a market response into grades as well. So a study over the last 4 years has shown that students who adhere to their natural sleep and wake rhythm, so they end up taking exams at the right time, and they wake up later and they go to school later. There is a huge increase in performance of those students. You see better grades, you see better mental health, you see students who are much more engaged in school. They're much more likely to behave better. Their moral actions are better as well. Whereas students who aren't sleeping well, you see more likely to misbehave, get in trouble, less likely to do well in their exams. Truancy goes up, absenteeism goes up. So there is a huge social impact that we are not attributing to sleep, which fundamentally sleep is the core issue.
Fascinating, yeah. So next question, one to debunk, is that you can't catch up on sleep. So if you've missed out and you got a couple of hours of sleep, you can't catch that up.
But it's a very interesting question. It's the question I get asked probably the most. Really is how much sleep do I need? And I haven't slept very well. I'm going to catch up at the weekend. But sleep isn't the same as saving money. So over the course of a week, if you save different amounts of money over the course of the week, on different amounts on different days, you'd end up with the same total. Whereas on sleep, if you don't have the same amount of sleep each night, you'll end up with a total, but the quality of those hours of sleep won't be good, even if you try and catch up at weekends. So for example, if you only sleep for 5 hours per night during the weekday, but you sleep for 8, 9, 10 hours at the weekend to try and catch up, you may have the same total as if you'd slept consistently all the way through, but the quality of sleep won't be there, because sleep doesn't work in one blanket scenario. So within sleep, you have the sleep cycles, and within each cycle, a number of different actions occur within the brain, going from light sleep to non-REM sleep, which is slow wave sleep, and then into REM sleep, and then back into light sleep. And the first period of the first cycle for REM sleep is very, very low. So there's not much REM sleep in the first cycle, whereas by the fifth cycle, it dominates the REM, the cycle. So the REM period is much, much longer. So if you only sleep for a couple of hours, the amount of REM sleep you'll get is very low. Whereas if you sleep for a longer period of time, the amount of REM sleep, which is where a lot of your memory consolidation occurs, a lot of recovery occurs in slow wave sleep and REM sleep. And therefore, when you've got greater amounts of it in period 5 as opposed to period 1, your body is able to recover and function in the way it needs to. So if you have short sleep, you're not getting the same amount of REM sleep. You're not getting the same quality of sleep. So therefore, catching up on sleep doesn't work. So the best thing that you can do is to try and regulate your sleep, so you have a consistent wake time and a consistent bedtime. And therefore your body is adhering to its natural rhythm, hopefully, but it's also knowing that it's preparing itself for sleep. So different hormones will prepare your body. They'll anticipate the sleep period. Whereas if it's haywire, it won't do that. It will struggle to know when it wants to be alert and when it wants to be asleep.
And I know you've done a lot of work with kind of executives and people in the boardroom, and my kind of experience in those environments is often you can work very late. What are the kind of implications? What are the things that come out of not getting enough sleep through the week in terms of in the business place and the workplace?
Well, it's very interesting. In the workplace, what you'll see is the very similar actions that if teenagers haven't slept. So you'll see an increase of lying, you'll see an increase of cheating, an increase of taking credit for other people's work. Immoral actions generally will go up. People will be less guarded on their actions, and so they're more likely to misbehave. They're more likely to be absent. they're also more likely, because they're tired, they feel like they have a need to stay there. So presenteeism goes through the roof. So they think, right, I better be here. I'm absolutely tired, but I'm going to stay in the office longer, and then everyone else forces it. And therefore you end up with a culture of people who are extremely tired, but are actually staying in the office, and therefore productivity drops. If you're a business leader, then you are less likely to see the value in the work that your subordinates are doing. So you're more likely to get irritated quickly, you're more likely to be quick to judge their actions, and in response, in an opposite way, you're more likely to see people who are subordinates being less engaged at work. They're less likely to see the charisma of the leaders, and they're less likely to work as hard as in that case. And you see a whole culture within a workplace being affected by sleep, and from behaviors to relationships, and to the end productivity as well.
Fascinating. I know as a new parent, the kind of impacts that lack of sleep can have on the kind of mood and just your motivation. So another kind of myth that might be true or might not be is your body can get used to a lack of sleep. It can start to tolerate less sleep.
Well, that's quite an interesting one. What we know is that the body requires sleep to do three main functions. The first function is that it regains the energy that it's spent throughout the day, but there are very, very small gains actually attributed to sleep, because sleep is a very busy period where a lot of energy is burnt up, because the brain is working at a very high rate. Any energy replenishment is one area that we think that sleep has a use. Another use we know is cell restoration. So during sleep period, there are a number of cells which repair the body, and that allows you to physically be ready for the next day. And then the final attribution is to do with memory consolidation. So during the sleep period, there is an optimal time for the brain to remember things that have happened throughout the day, and therefore select the best memories from the day. Therefore, when things that happen again, you're then able to cope with them better. For example, crossing the road. If you cross the road and a car comes very close to you, you'll more than likely dream about that night, or that memory will be played over, and different scenarios will be played over. So the memory will be selected, the best memory, so that the next time you cross the road, you'll know to look left and right. And that's how we think that as evolution, we have evolved, and sleep plays that crucial part in our behaviors and learned behaviors as well. And then finally, on the back of that, it's really interesting that they think that novel concepts to very difficult problems are solved during sleep. So we've seen that people who have slept for longer periods have actually improved their chances of coming up with solutions to difficult problems. A study about 10, 15 years ago showed three different groups. And the first group were given a problem in the morning, and then they were asked to solve it in the afternoon. And around 25% of people solved the problem. The second group were given the same problem in the morning and then slept on it, but they had a deliberately disturbed night of sleep, and then were asked to solve the problem the next morning. And only 21% of people were able to solve the problem. But then the third group were given the problem in the morning. They then had a full night's sleep, slept very well, and then were asked to solve the problem. And between 60 and 70% of the people were able to find the hidden solution that was within the task.
The power of sleep.
And the power of sleep, yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, fascinating. And that's really interesting. And I mean, one of the things that I often debate with my brother is, he'll often go to bed pretty late, so kind of about midnight, and he's on a drive to kind of lose some weight and get fit, but he's only kind of time to go to the gym is kind of 6 a.m. in the morning. And I have this debate with him about actually, what's better, kind of getting a full night's sleep or going to the gym. Do you have any kind of perspectives on it?
Well, it goes down to some of the work we did with athletes as well. So with athletes, there are often set times that they're asked to train or travel or perform. And getting them to understand that sleep is fundamental to performance. Without sleep, there is no foundation to your performance. Your mood suffers, your physicality, your strength, your anaerobic output is affected by sleep. And so if you are going to the gym, it's about prioritizing your sleep. So if an athlete, if you can, prioritize your sleep so that you're in a position where you can sleep and regain get all the benefits from the exercise that you've done the day before. Prepare your body for the next day, and then function as optimally as possible when you go to the gym the very next morning. So by cutting down on your sleep, two things are happening. You're not getting the benefits from the night before's training or the day before's training, and you're not improving your performance. You're not performing as optimally as possible as you can. And so therefore I would say to your brother, look at the power of sleep, look how important it is. Prioritize your sleep as much as you can, and therefore then set your training around that. Not only will you be able to train to a better extent, perform to a better extent, the improvements you'll see that he's looking for will be far exceeded than if he was sleep deprived.
Fascinating. That's definitely one I'll relay to my bro. We've got a bit of a random one, and this is one that we often see kind of people talking a lot about. All that matters is the amount of time that you're asleep. Just length of sleep is the key thing that matters.
Yeah, I would say that there are a number of things that come into play. So the length of time that you're asleep depends on the individual. So 1% of the population are short sleepers, and that's people who require fewer than 6 hours worth of sleep per night. But that's only 1% of the population. So the majority of people require between 7 and 9 hours worth of sleep. And therefore, what we see is the government then stipulating that you need 8 hours worth of sleep, because that sits bang in between. But that doesn't actually work within sleep cycles. You'll be waking up in the middle of a cycle if you sleep for 8 hours, most probably.
Okay. Another myth. All that matters is the amount of time that you're asleep.
Well, that's an interesting one, because the amount of sleep that we need as individuals varies. So in the same way that we're all different heights, we need different amounts of sleep. And there are very few people in the UK who are known as short sleepers, only 1% of the population or so, and they require 6 hours or less of sleep. And so they will function optimally on having that. If you ask them to sleep any longer or a lot less, then they would struggle. And so actually what we found with one example was a chap who came in and said, I think I've got a sleep problem, I'm only sleeping for 6 hours. He is newly married, and his partner was extremely worried that he wasn't sleeping enough. So he then became worried about his own sleep. And looking at his history, actually he'd spent his entire life for only sleeping for around 6 hours, 5.5, 6 hours per night. And he was functioning absolutely fine. And then when he met his partner, because he learnt that he needed more sleep, he then tried to sleep longer, and he found that he was more tired, more groggy, more grumpy. And he was getting more worried, which exacerbated the fact that he wasn't sleeping particularly well. And it was actually the case that he didn't need that much sleep, and he actually functioned a lot better on 6 hours worth of sleep. But it's really important to stress that only 1% of the population can thrive on that, can function and perform in the way that they need to on that amount of sleep. A lot of people need a lot more than the 7 to 9 hours, which is regulated sleep that generally, the general population would have. They might long sleepers might need anything between 12 and 14 hours worth of sleep, able to try and function in the same way that kind of normal sleepers would sleep. But they're quite extreme as well. But probably the most famous person who slept for around 12 hours during the 24-hour period was Roger Federer, who said that if he doesn't get if he doesn't get 12 hours worth of sleep, then something's not right. And so he needed that in order to perform in the way that he did. But generally, most of us need between 7 and 9 hours worth of sleep. And that's why the government puts out a general, you need 8 hours worth of sleep, try and get your 8 hours. However, that doesn't equate to the sleep cycles. 5 cycles would be 7.5 hours, and 6 cycles would be 9 hours. So rather than looking at the length of time that you're asleep in blocks, look at it more in cycles. So try and work out how many sleep cycles you think you roughly are going to need, and then try and wake up at the end of a cycle. If you wake up at the end of a cycle, you're more likely to feel refreshed. You're less likely to feel groggy. Your sleep inertia, which is that groggy feeling when you wake up, will be for a considerably shorter amount of time.
Fascinating. So true or false on this one? You only snore when you're in deep sleep. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it depends. If people are light sleepers, they might snore throughout the whole sleep period. But if you're a heavy sleeper, they're most predominantly seen in kind of REM sleep. That's where a lot of deep and heavy snorers would actually snore during those periods.
Yeah, it's always a danger to anyone in the bed with them. So very random one, this one, so you have to excuse it. The average person swallows 8 spiders per night in their sleep.
Wow. That's a question and a half. I would say that's probably highly unlikely. That requires the spider to want to go into your mouth to them in the middle of the night. And if it's pitch black and you've set your bedroom up correctly, then it shouldn't induce a large amount of spiders in your bedroom. It should be dark enough that they don't want to crawl into your mouth in the first place. And realistically, the fact that we've got teeth is probably an evolutionary way that we don't swallow things when we don't want to.
Fascinating.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. So true or false, you need to go to the bathroom more in the night when you get older.
So the bathroom's an interesting one. So what we've seen is that people who get up to go to the bathroom are normally waking up at the end of a cycle. And so they're actually microseconds when they're awake, and then their body goes, you need the toilet. So then that's when they rise to get up. It's not actually that you need the toilet and then therefore you've woken up. You've actually woken up first, and then your brain has said, I think you need to go to the toilet. And so that's the way it works. With older people, it's slightly different. We know that the bowel control is a lot weaker. We know that broken sleep occurs more as you get older and you sleep for shorter periods of time at night time, and you wake up a lot earlier. And therefore, all of those reasons can look like that you, as an older person, you are then going to the toilet more frequently, and your sleep is being broken.
Fascinating. So another true or false, everyone has the same length of sleep cycle.
Well, the sleep cycles really vary between 90 and kind of 110 minutes long, roughly. And so the length of your sleep cycle will then affect how long you actually need to sleep. And the best way to figure that out is to try not to wake up to an alarm. So if you're on holiday, figure out when is the most natural time for you to wake up. Figure out how you feel after you've woken up. Do you feel groggy? Do you feel tired? Do you want to go back to sleep? Or are you refreshed and ready to get out of bed and not that groggy? And you'll be able to feel that waking up, not only whether or not the length of sleep that you've had is good, but also the timing of your length. So the timing of your sleep period and your sleep cycle. So then when you go to back to work or back to reality, you can then roughly have an idea of how long you then need to sleep.
Fascinating. Very interesting. So this is one that I've heard a lot, and there's a lot of debate going on at the moment. And that's, you can make yourself a morning person.
So that's an interesting one. So we know that chronotypes, which are whether or not you're a morning person or a dove or an evening person, are predominantly genetically designed. So the length of your PER2 gene, your period 2 gene, determines whether or not you're an evening person or a morning person. And it's believed, quite interestingly, that this was from our ancestral days when we would be around a campfire and there would need to be security and the campfire would need to have been kept going. So you'd have people who would take the morning shift, and then people who take the early evening shift, and then people would take the later evening shift. And therefore it's conjectured that that's where our chronotypes developed. But can you change it? Well, we also know that light has an impact on your chronotype, so that if you are waking up earlier and that light is coming in earlier, you'll maybe able to shift your clock back a little bit, so that you're actually waking up a little bit earlier. So in theory, you can't change your chronotype because it's genetically designed. However, there are external factors that can allow you to behave and perform better earlier on in the morning. So getting lots of light in the morning is fundamental as soon as you wake up. If you want to be an early person and you naturally think that you're a late person, then make sure that you're stimulating the clock. Let the body know what time of day it is straight away as soon as you wake up. Get your morning light that comes in at least half an hour. And this is achievable by having things very simple like breakfast by a window, going out for a walk, walking the dog in the morning. If you're in a rush, go outside and go for a run as soon as you get up. Or if you're going to the gym, then get off at the bus stop one before the gym and walk that just that extra bit of daylight in the morning will allow your clock to know what time of day it is, because the eyes are brilliant. Mm-hmm. The thing to remember is that eyes give us vision. They give us perspective and vision, but they also give a sense of time. So they're the portal to the sense of time that the brain takes. So the brain will guess what time it is, and it will assume and it will anticipate what time it is, but the eyes will confirm what time of day it is. And so then the brain, the SCN, will then set a number of functions to all the genes within our body, which have our own separate clocks, to then say, this is the time that you need to function. This is the time that you need to shut off. And therefore, our behaviors are affected purely by the way that the brain has seen the time through the eye. And light is the main thing that the brain takes, the main cue that the brain takes to set the clock internally.
Super interesting. And I guess one of the things is, can you artificially stimulate that? If you're in a very dark place where there's not much sunlight, can you do things to encourage your brain to be a bit more alert in the mornings?
Well, the thing about light is that there's a lot of argument between scientists. Some say our eyes are not very good because they can't tell the difference between daylight and indoor light. But there's also an argument to say that our eyes are brilliant. Like right now, we're sitting in a room and it may be with these lights, 900, 700 lux, something like that. If we're sitting in a normal office, it's around 150 to 300 lux. But if we went outside, and even on a miserable cold winter's day, the minimum amount of lux you're going to get from daylight is around 10,000 lux. So the difference between being outside and being inside is huge. On a really hot sunny day, it's going to be up to 100,000 lux. So going from 300 lux to 100,000 lux is huge, but it takes our eye a split second to adjust. But as I said, with vision, it will then adjust so that we can adapt and we can perform in the way that we want to. And but with the time of the clock, it takes a lot longer for it to know what time it is. You'll need at least 30 minutes of exposure to a light source to actually know what time it is. So yes, you can get bright lights, you can get lamps, which give you a much higher percentage of light. but it's about the timing of that, making sure that it's at the right time of day. Early morning is probably the best, or morning time is best, and making sure that you have the duration as well. But if you can't have it that end, what you can do is work at the other end, which I mean by that at night time you can try and make sure the lights are right down low, so the brain knows this is the time you want to go to sleep. You're not stimulated by bright lights. You're actually reducing the amount of light for at least maybe an hour, 2 hours before you go to bed. And that just allows the body to say, okay, this is the time that, you know, the sun is not there. I don't need to be alert. I don't need to be awake. I don't need to go and find food. I don't need to make sure I'm not being predated, and I don't need to go and find a partner. So this is the time I'm going to be sleeping and I'm going to recover. So telling your brain what time it is crucial. Unfortunately, now we live in a constant dim light world where you have dim light as soon as you wake up, and then throughout the day it's dim light, and then there's too much light at nighttime. So our brain really doesn't know how to function. And what we're seeing actually is that affects our circadian rhythm, and we're seeing that every ailment within that we know as humans has a circadian effect in some way. So we know that this constant dim light is actually affecting our mental and physical health in the short and the long term.
Yeah, it's a tricky path for us to navigate in the modern world of technology. And I think we see it in the figures and the stats, the number of people struggling with sleep issues. So another one that we sometimes get up is that waking up early makes you more productive.
I think that started from the post-industrial era, where they were trying to regulate a time when everybody woke up. So the uniformity of production started early in the morning. And so they then sent lots of messages out like early bird catches the worm. Then you end up having a society full of people who think, I better get up early, because the messaging coming through is, if you get up early, you're a better human being. What we've seen is that people perform better depending on their chronotype. So getting up at a time which is more suitable to you, and creating a list of tasks throughout the day which you can do at different times of the day. So when to exercise, when to eat, when to do difficult tasks, when to have focus and concentration, when to do athletic, anaerobic or aerobic exercise changes throughout the day. And so by adhering to the time of day that suits you as an individual, you're more likely to perform better. You're not fighting against anything. You're actually allowing your body and your brain to perform to its peak. So I would say, if anybody thinks that getting up early in the morning is better, I might ask them why they think that's better.
Fascinating. I saw some interesting research linking your chronotype with your friendship groups, because apparently if you're a late night person, you hang around with more late night people, and morning person, you hang around with more morning people. So it's amazing the kind of impacts that it has on wider life.
Yeah, and absolutely, as you said, as a young parent, if you're an evening type and your partner's a morning type, that's a really optimal way to look after a baby, because one of you will be looking after the baby in the early morning, the other one will be staying up later with it. So there's a very short period where that baby can just cry throughout the middle of the night. So so it's a very interesting dynamic, and learning your partner's chronotype is fundamental to probably having a healthy and happy relationship as well.
I just get told I'm lazy for not getting up, but I'm a late sleeper. That's my excuse.
That's right.
So some people, true or false, some people are lighter sleepers than others.
Well, there's a lot of interesting debate on this. So light sleepers may have a lot of co-founding factors going on in their life. So there might be high levels of stress. There might be an environment which is noisier and disturbing them more. They might be affected by so light sleepers. They might end up actually having a number of factors which affect their sleep. So the environment might affect their sleep. You might find that they have a number of stressors. There might be a relationship between the fact that they're a light sleep and their history of sleep, whether or not they're more anxious about their sleep. And so There isn't any conclusive evidence really that people who are light sleepers or deep sleepers, but what you see is that people can be exacerbated in their perception of their sleep. They can feel that they are triggered to wake up more frequently than they actually need to. So I would say if you are a light sleeper, then you should probably look at the environment firstly that you're sleeping in. What's your pre-sleep routine? Are you sleeping at the right time? Is the environment the right temperature for you? Is the right amount of noise for you? Some people sleep better with a bit of noise. Some people sleep better in the quiet. And so making sure that the environment adapts to you. So you've got to be the best fit for your environment. And therefore, hopefully you'll see improvements in your sleep disturbances.
Fascinating. So true or false, older people need less sleep?
So that is a myth. As you become an adult, the amount of time that you need to sleep throughout the 24-hour period roughly stays the same. So it's slightly less for older people, but only slightly. But what happens is that their clock shifts. So you end up having a much earlier wake time, and therefore it feels like they're having a much shorter sleep period. But what you'll see is most older people will catch up that sleep in the middle of the day. And if you add that total up, it probably will equate to the same amount of sleep that they required in their 40s and 50s. So the sleep period doesn't change beyond kind of 21, 22 adulthood, really.
Fascinating. So true or false, exercising at night is bad for sleep. So just before you go to bed, going for a moonlit jog around the park is a bad idea.
Yeah, well, we've seen with athletes that often when they're performing late at night, whether we've seen Premier League footballers or we've seen tennis players performing late at night, finishing very late in the early morning on some occasions, that the potential to then get to sleep is really difficult. The adrenaline's through the roof. You've got the cortisol levels through the roof. The alertness is peaked. And to then try and say, right, you've got to get to sleep because you've got to stick to your sleep plan is very, very inconsistent and is more likely to do more harm than good. You'll see people lying in bed, not being able to sleep, thinking, come on, I've got to sleep. But their body is still on a high, and it's going to take 2-3 hours for them to come off that high, and for then the sleep process, the hormones for the sleep process to then take over. So yes, exercise is one of the cues that the body takes to let it know that it needs to be alert. So by regulating the timing of your exercise, you can help regulate your sleep as well. So the advice would be to try and do it earlier rather than later, and give yourself a few hours to recover as well. Meal times are also the same. So it's another cue that the body takes, as well as light, as well as exercise, as well as things like urine production. It's also to do with meal times as well. So we often see people who are eating a bit later might struggle to actually initially get to sleep.
One that I've seen a bit of coverage of late is the sleeping habits of gamers, and how they all seem to form a tribe about gaming late into the night. Have you seen any kind of studies around gamers lately?
Well, gamers is a new kind of concept. You see often they're in a very dark room, and if you're gaming for a long period of time, you can't be in a room where there's daylight, so you're not getting the light stimulus. So the light that should be there, the signals are not going to the brain. So therefore, the body then keeps it on a dimly lit circadian rhythm, where it's hard to tell whether or not it's morning, afternoon, or night. And so we see gamers often staying up later. Often that's the social time when everyone's doing it, so you then push yourself back to do it. There's often people creating stimulants to try and keep themselves awake and vigilant and alert. The whole idea of working and socializing later is just endemic within our 24-hour society. And it's just about understanding. It's just about knowledge and realizing that if you want your vigilance to be high, if you want your reaction times to be high, if you want your concentration to be consistent over a long game, then you're going to have to make sure your sleep's there.
So if I'm a elite gamer rather than an elite athlete coming to you, what would you recommend and suggest?
Well, firstly, I would say to understand how sleep works. So by understanding how sleep works, you can then regulate it yourself. You can control it yourself. You can then take accountability for your own sleep. Firstly, it's important to know that sleep isn't just a blank period, which is inconvenient between being awake one day and being awake the next day. There are actually a number of processes, which we've spoken about earlier, that occur. But there are two main processes in the way that sleep works. So the first way is that the longer you're awake, the more there is an increase to try and fall asleep again. So normally about 16 hours of being awake is enough time to naturally help people then fall back asleep. Adenosine builds up during the daytime, and it's like a SANS timer, one of those clock timers that build up. The adenosine will build up over time, and when it's reached capacity, it will then say, right, let's go to sleep. And when it goes to sleep, it will then dissipate, and that then happens on a cycle. So if you only had that cycle, you would be awake and asleep at totally random times of the day, depending on how long you stayed awake or how long you slept the night before. So you would be on this random cycle, which is totally out of sync with not just the world around you, but the society around you as well. So therefore, the second process is required to sync the sleep process to the time of day, and that's our circadian rhythm. And so the circadian rhythm will timestamp the day, saying now's the appropriate time to be awake, now's the appropriate time to be asleep, and it then adjusts the wake and the sleep period at a time that fits the day and the night cycle. So nocturnal animals will have it the opposite way around, but as diurnal beings, we then try and correlate our wake times to the light, and we correlate the dark times to sleep.
So in a similar vein, often, for business or for travel, we need to jet out to another country, maybe for a couple of hours in a different time zone. What are some steps that people can take to not mess up your sleep when you've gone to another time zone, and try and avoid that kind of dreaded jet lag that can really impact our sleep? Are there any kind of steps that people can take?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to know that because the second process, which is the circadian rhythm, needs to timestamp the day, it needs to know the time, and that's taken from the light and the dark cycle. So then if you then jet travel, then the light and the dark cycle is on a different rhythm. Your brain then has time to adapt to it. So they have said that So that is commonly known that So what we do know is that it can take up to 8 days for your body clock to fully synchronize with a new time zone, which is organized by jet travel. So what we need to have really is as much light at the right time of day to sync you to the new rhythm. So with jet lag, what we know is that it can take up to 8 days for your clock to sync to a new time zone, which is very much removed from your original time zone. And the way that the body clock will do that is by processing the light and the dark cycle. So what you can do to prepare yourself for your jet travel and to negate the effects of jet lag is to try and sync your clock to the new time zone as early as possible. So by going to bed at different times, so maybe shifting your bed time by half an hour each night before you go for maybe 4 or 5 nights, will help your body clock entrain to a slightly different cycle. So when you go to the new time zone, your body clock is prepared for that new cycle, and then the light stimulus as well will have a major effect. So making sure that you get the light at the right times of day and night 3 or 4 days before you travel, and then also 3 or 4 days after you arrive, will then help your body clock adjust a lot quicker than if you just try and stay awake or try and fall asleep during travel.
I can remember traveling to China quite a lot, and we'd often go there for 1-2 day trips and try and not adjust. And yeah, some of the team going around with dark glasses on. Is that a technique? Is that helpful to stop the adjustment happening too much? Or
Yeah, so if you can just sync it, whichever clock you're trying to sync to, if you can reduce the amount of light coming in as possible at the times when you want to be asleep or when you want your body clock to still be asleep, and then try and maximize the amount of light. And that's the time you should be eating, that's the time that you should be exercising. So try and keep the behaviors the same that you would do in the light as compared to in the dark, depending on the clock that you want to retain.
So very random one, so apologies for this, but we get asked this a lot. So true or false, cheese gives you nightmares?
Well, gosh, that is, you might need a biologist, a gut biologist. What we do know is that the gut and the brain are intrinsically linked. More and more evidence is showing that the gut has a major role to play in brain functioning. Whether or not certain amount of microbiome affects sleep and dreaming via cheese, I'm not too sure. I think the jury's still out.
Yeah, fascinating, very interesting. Okay, another true or false. Having a lie-in ruins your sleep patterns.
So yes, so not sticking to your sleep period, the time that you want to sleep, often can cause severe sleep disruption in the future. What we see is that people who are sleep deprived during the weekday and then at weekends, naturally, we all want to catch up. And we all call, and what that's termed is social jet lag. So you are sleep deprived and then you're sleeping for probably too long a period within the vain hope that you are making up for the sleep that you've lost. So what we try and do actually is regulate the amount of sleep that you can get. And we do that by prioritizing our sleep. So if you prioritize your sleep throughout the week, if you set your work and exercise and life schedule around getting enough sleep, getting the right amount of sleep for you as an individual, that would negate the effect, and you can actually enjoy your weekends more. You can, because then you can sleep to the right amount at the weekend, and therefore you get more of that weekend to enjoy doing other activities.
Testify, yeah. So true or false, you shouldn't nap for more than 20 minutes.
So with napping, around 20 minutes is an optimal time to nap, and that's because within the first cycle that you fall asleep, it's the light sleep period is around 20 minutes long. So anything longer than that, you're actually sleeping a lot deeper. You're probably in slow wave sleep, or later on you're in REM sleep. And waking up in those periods, you're more likely to be confused, you're more likely to feel groggy, you're more likely to feel less rested, like you haven't actually slept well from your nap. So waking up in the first 20 minutes will make you feel as rested as you can do. On the other end of that coin is you can either sleep for around 20 minutes on a nap or around 90 minutes. So complete the cycle, and so you're back into that light sleep phase again. So if you really feel you're sleep deprived and you want a longer nap, if you get it for 90 minutes, 90 to 100 minutes, then you're back in the light sleep phase. Again, you're going to reap the rewards from that nap. You're actually going to feel like you've slept well. You're going to feel replenished, and you're going to feel less groggy than if you'd woken up within 60 minutes or so. So 20 minutes or 90 minutes is probably the most optimal nap time.
Fantastic. So this one I've heard an awful lot, but yeah, really good to get your perspective on it. So true or false, looking at your phone or watching TV before bed is bad for your sleep?
Well, there is some evidence out there that being stimulated before you go to sleep, so being active on your phone, engaging in work or something like that, which is increasing your stress levels, will affect your sleep. But generally, the screen effect is a slight misconception. Most screens nowadays have a blue blocker, but it's not just about the wavelength of sleep. So yes, we know that yes, we know that the blue wavelength has the that has the greatest effect, the greatest stimulant on the circadian system. But any light that's bright enough will have a similar effect on the circadian system. So a really bright red light will have a greater effect on the stimulant on the circadian rhythm than a very dim blue light. So the idea of blocking out the blue light and getting rid of screens, it's about the brightness of that screen, the timing of that brightness of the screen. The effect of the screen could be bad, but it depends on the situation, depends what the ambient room lighting is, and it depends also the duration of your time.
Yeah, I saw an interesting YouTube kind of tongue-in-cheek thing when someone was complaining about their lack of sleep, and they were asking kind of what they got up to before bed. It was like watch a few murder documentaries, on the TV, and then get on the phone for a bit of scrolling once I'm in bed, and watch some fight videos, and you're kind of like, well, you got to guess, but yeah, amusing stuff. So another true or false, not everyone has nightmares.
Well, what we do know is that during that sleep period, during the REM period, which is where all of our dreaming occurs, we know that that dreaming can be impacted by social behaviours from the day before, interactions from the day before, and over our lifetime, these memories get stored and they get played out within our REM period. And we know that different people will have different experiences in life, and therefore their sleep will be a way of processing those experiences and then trying to find solutions or common understanding of those experiences. So the next time that we are awake, or the next time we're in a situation that's similar, we can actually function and thrive rather than go through the worst case scenarios.
Fascinating. Dream is such a wonderful, mystical world. You kind of, it's a different environment completely. So this one is a bit different but similar. So you inherit your sleep styles from your parents.
Okay, so can you inherit your sleep style from your parents? Well, within sleep, there are a number of things that can affect it. So firstly, the society that you live in, so the behaviours of the people around you, the behaviours that you're brought up with, can all affect the time in which that your sleep period is synced to the outside world. We know that it is genetic as well. There is a genetic disposition to the timing that you want to be asleep and how long you sleep for. But if you live in a world, if you live in a house which is where most people are kind of getting up early, and it's perceived to get up earlier, people are going to try and get up earlier. They might be fighting against their natural disposition, but there is a definite causal effect from society on the individual and how they sleep.
Yeah, I always like to contrast the kind of eating, dining, socialising culture of Spain with the UK. And, Spain, they're all eating 10 p.m. at night. UK, we're eating 6, 7, and then one has the siesta, one doesn't really have a nap. Yeah, kind of always a fascinating dynamic there.
Yeah, and we've seen within time zones as well. So a really interesting study that came out about 6 years ago looked at the chronotypes depending on where people lived within a time zone. So the more west you are of a time zone, the later you're going to get sun than compared to the east side of that time zone. And so we see more people who are evening types living, whereas just over the border on the next time zone, you see more morning types. And that is a pure relation of the amount of light those individuals get, but also how the society might also function.
Fascinating. I know often I've got calls over in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and those guys are very used to hopping on a call at 7:30 in the morning. And here we'd find it rude if someone proposed a 7:30 a.m. Zoom call. I can totally see that happening. Sleeping on your own is better for you. True or false?
Well, On the whole, you want to be in a place where you can get the rest that you require. Disturbed as infrequently by noises, by sounds, by other people, by temperatures, anything that can affect your sleep. If people are disturbed by their partner, then it's probably better that they have good sleep. We know that in the old days, most people would sleep in separate rooms. And even if they were married, they would sleep in separate rooms because that's the time in which they were asleep. But there is another side to it, which suggests that some people feel safer with a partner next to them. Some people feel like they are, what am I trying to say? So some people feel safer when their partner is sleeping next to them. So it's not always that you should be sleeping on your own to then get better sleep. Yes, it may work for you, but it depends how it works for you as a pair. And there's no one size fits all is probably the best way to describe the answer.
Yeah, I remember my tour around the Yacht Britannica, the Queen's bed and the Duke's bed, and they were onto this science a long time ago.
Yeah.
Hence they lived so long. Here's a key myth, probably one that people are keenly interested in. You can't cure insomnia.
Well, the thing about insomnia, there are so many facets to it. So there's often people think that they have insomnia when they just have sleep disturbances. So clinical insomnia is something that needs to be treated by a professional. What we know that sleep improvements can be made through cognitive behavioral therapy, through adjustments in sleep hygiene, through prioritizing your sleep, through a greater understanding of why we sleep. What we know is that a lot of people struggle with their sleep because they're worried about their sleep. So understanding that waking up is a natural part of sleep and just an inconvenient part of sleep can sometimes allay any stresses that people may be facing. So there are a number of things that people can do, and it should be really hammered home that if you are really struggling with your sleep, it's important to go to a GP and go and speak to a doctor. But it is important to also stress that you have the ability to control your sleep as well.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, and I mean, I have my own personal battles with insomnia. I found a few simple changes to my habits and ways of kind of getting ready for sleep made a profound impact, and it was kind of just lifestyle changes mostly. So true or false, going to bed earlier will get you a better night's sleep?
Well, there is some evidence to suggest that a lot of people who stay up late actually can possibly miss the timing of their melatonin rise, and they end up not getting to sleep so quickly because they've kind of missed the timing that their brain has said you should get to sleep by. But on the whole, it depends on your chronotype. It depends on your sleep history, and it depends on your sleep disposition. If you can sleep to the right times that's related to you as an individual, that might not necessarily mean getting to bed earlier. What is important is timing your sleep into your clock, and then trying to prioritize it, and then also trying to make sure that you've got enough time to wake up at the end of it. But what the best thing to do is just to figure it out for yourself. So go to sleep at different times and see how you feel on it.
On a similar vein, and I think we touched on this briefly earlier, true or false, 6 hours of sleep a night is enough. 6 hours sleep a night is enough.
Yeah, so as we said, there's no one size fits all. So some people will require fewer hours of sleep. Some require a lot more. The average is between 7 and 9. What we want to do is to make sure that we feel rested at the end of it. We want to feel like sleep has given us what it was set out to do, which is to help us recover, help us replenish the energy that we've lost throughout the day, and make us feel like we can then attack the day. So depending on what works for you as an individual, you can figure out how much sleep that you have. But it is key to remember that very, very few people can thrive on less than 6 hours worth of sleep.
What is REM sleep?
So REM sleep is rapid eye movement. So that's what it stands for. That is when your body is shut down. So it goes into something called atonia, which is basically paralyzing all of your muscles. And that's because your brain is the most active state that it is during sleep. You see the eyes moving, which is why it's rapid eye movement. And you see that within the brain, that the EEGs are going off the chart to actually show that a lot of processes are happening within the brain. And what we know is that during REM sleep is when you dream, is often when your memory consolidation occurs, and we know that the longer that you're asleep, the more REM sleep that you get throughout that night period. The reason our body goes into atonia is to stop us from acting out those dreams. So because the brain is so active and it's so alert and there's so many things that are going on, it wants to make sure that we then don't act out what we are seeing within our sleep state. So then it very cleverly shuts it down. So then being woken up from that period, not only is your body in a state of atonia, but your brain is at an incredibly high functioning state. So waking up in that period really disturbs your body, disturbs your brain, and you're going to feel pretty rough waking up in the middle of it. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and thought, oh my gosh, I feel awful, or I've been woken up by a loud noise and you don't know where you are, you're discombobulated, that's often you've been woken up in REM sleep.
Interesting one here, which hopefully no one has to put to the test, but how long can you go without sleep?
I wouldn't like to find out. So we know that sleep is fundamental to our processing. We know that you can last a long time without food. You know that you can last a shorter amount of time without water. But surviving without sleep, the psychological processes that occur to our mental health are severe, and they are long-lasting as well. So I wouldn't like to hazard a guess on how long you can spend without sleep. You could probably spend a long time without sleep, but how you are at the end of it is debatable. So that's all I know about that.
Talking space travel and long flights to Mars, if you were designing tools to help astronauts go to Mars, how would you approach their sleep and make sure they kind of got what they needed and got everything they needed from sleep?
Well, what we see there is that NASA are already using a lot of chronobiology within their astronaut flights. We don't have the 24-hour cycle that we have on Earth when you're flying, so you would then employ really bright lights at the right time of day, real darkness at the time of day to try and entrain their 24-hour clock. The body clock is slightly longer than 24 hours, so it needs constant readjustment to the day-night cycle. So if you are traveling really long distances, then it's really fundamental that your meal times, that your exercise times, that your sleep times are all the timings that you need them, and making sure that you get the light that you need at the right time. So not only that, you've got the psychological impact of kind of a trip to Mars and how that it will impact your sleep as well. So making sure things that are happening together in social times, making sure that there is enough to do socially, making sure that there is a feeling of an end of a day, and then making sure that a collective period of getting to sleep and waking up and rituals will also help entrain the body into some sort of cycle, into some sort of behavioral cycle, but also a physiological cycle as well.
And say we do get to that end of that journey and we've got a colony on Mars. Obviously, they don't have 24-hour clock on Mars. How do you think we have to manage that? And could we deal with it? Could we live there? Or would it, have untold consequences?
Yeah, I guess, well, there would be times in which we would need to readjust our clock for the beginning period and making sure that we're having the right amounts of daylight or artificial light at the times that we are required to. But I guess over time, survival of the fittest requires adaptations to your environment. So our ancestors a long time down the line may have very, very, very different cycles to how we are now, may live in very different ways if they're on a different planet where the cycle is much longer.
Yeah, fascinating. If you had to kind of give someone advice on how to get to sleep, they struggle to switch off, they've got busy racing minds, what would your advice to them be?
I think it's find out what works for you. So really listen to your body, take note of how you're sleeping. Try and take away as much of the emotion out of it as possible to actually understand what's actually happening to your body. If you're waking up, what's that attributed to? Is it stress? Try and find the cause of those things. There's a lot of sleep tech, as we know, that can help. So finding something that works for you. I was working with an athlete 6 months ago, and we worked out that they didn't like sleeping in a very, very quiet environment. So we had pink noise playing. They had a lot of things going on before their performance, worrying about how they're going to perform, nerves, worrying about if they can remember how they're going to do it, and about how they're feeling, any nerves that they had. And we actually found that by taking away the time in which that they would ruminate, think constantly, by playing pink noise, we found a really nice way that they could actually get to sleep. And that worked for one person. The next person who had very similar problems tried it. They found that didn't work for them as well. So it's about making sure that you know how and why you're not sleeping, and then what works for you as the individual, really.
Fascinating. It'd be interesting. Have you got any kind of interesting sleep facts that you've come across in your journeys? Like, I found the insight about Roger Federer's sleep times really interesting. I mean, have you worked with anyone just with the oddest of odd behaviours that you're like, wow, that's special?
Well, we had a lady come in who had not slept. She told us she hadn't slept for over 30 days. And if you haven't slept for over 30 days, we know that the consequences are dire. So we were a bit dubious at this. So when we measured her sleep, we saw that she had slept intermittently, very, very infrequently. But she's had very short amounts of sleep, but it was very intermittent. And the next morning she said, look, I told you I didn't sleep. And she couldn't believe the data that we were showing her, that actually there were periods of time when she was asleep. And that took a lot of retraining of understanding about what's actually happening to her in the first process. There are so many different ways in which we sleep. If you think about, we're mammals. Mammals sleep not in one block normally. They sleep in different blocks. So if you think a cat throughout the day will sleep intermittently, if you think a dog, if you've got a dog, will fall asleep for a couple of hours. Humans, we stay awake and we sleep in one block. And that's really believed to have changed since the industrial era. So it's believed that we actually normally slept for about 4 hours at night time. Then we got up, we got out of bed, we even left the house, we socialized, we went to go and talk to other people, and then we went back to sleep for a second cycle. So our behavior has changed. All in all.